To what extent does Iran's status as a multi-ethnic country where you have Persians, Arabs, Kurds, Azeris, and other nationalities all living together, to what extent does that affect the political situation of Iran and the protest movement?
Yeah, so this is a good point, right? So we have to remember that, even though Iran and Persia are sometimes used interchangeably, Persians or Farsi speakers are only about 60% of the population. So there have been active protests and history of armed rebellion among Iran's various ethnic groups. The Kurds, for example, have a history of armed resistance throughout the region in Turkey, Syria, and Iraq. And the Kurds in Iran present perhaps the most credible secessionist threat. But there have been also groups like Arabs, Baluchis, and others that have been active in arguing for autonomy, if not outright independence, in recent years. Uh, that said, Iran hasn't had the level of armed separatist activity as, say, Turkey or Syria. It doesn't mean that the sentiment doesn't exist, but I think some of the fears of sort of armed ethnic rebellion are a little bit overblown. Uh, the Islamic Republic is not sort of ethnically defined in the way that, say, Saddam Hussein's Iraq or um, Bashar al-Assad's Syria were. So the Iranian regime does include other ethnic groups. For example, the president, Pezeshkian, he's Azeri, so he's from the north, from the northern Azeri region, close to the border with Azerbaijan. But it doesn't mean that there isn't, some pockets of ethnic resentment and a desire for, again, a more loosely federated structure, if not independence. So the protests in Iran that we see are broad, they're multi-ethnic, they're united in that they want the regime to fall, but they aren't necessarily united in what they want to see occur the day after. So some of these ethnic groups might want far greater decentralization or perhaps outright independence, and that remains to be seen.
How did the people of Iran see the 12-day war that pitted Israel and the U.S. against Iran? Did that strengthen or weaken the regime?
I mean, that's really a complicated question, and it's going to depend on sort of who you ask and what elements of Iranian society you're looking at. So for supporters of the regime, certainly the military establishment, this sort of external threat, the threat from Iran and Israel, they see this as evidence of a foreign plot leading to some sort of foreign imposed regime change. They're even saying that the protests are evidence of foreign meddling in Iranian domestic affairs, and they've tried to discredit the protesters as being puppets or agents of the United States or Israel. So among regime loyalists, maybe at most 20% of the population, although that's probably even generous. The war last summer did cause a rally effect around the supreme leader. So in that sense, you can say that the military strikes of last summer and the threats of renewed military strikes strengthened the regime's resolve. Now, the general public, I think it would be safe to say, was more ambivalent. Some Iranians, especially Iranians in the diaspora, actually welcomed the attacks. But my sense is that most Iranians don't want an all-out war. They maybe weren't upset with targeted strikes on military targets or nuclear facilities, but they're concerned about what's going to happen to their loved ones, and if stray bombs fall into their neighborhoods. But at the same time, we have to remember that the opposition to the regime doesn't necessarily and directly translate into love for the U.S. Or Israel. Many Iranians are wary of U.S. influence in the region. Certainly, there's a troubled history of U.S.-Iran relations that goes back decades. Many Iranians are opposed to Israeli actions in Gaza, so it's not all black and white. While regime supporters might have rallied behind the leader, rallied behind the flag, the typical Iranian sort of has mixed feelings about what external military strikes mean for them.